This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.
The 40 foot is special because of the depth of the water.
I love the 40 foot regular swimmer here.
I've just been swimming in the 40 foot.
The 40 foot has a draw and a pull.
Oh, it just makes you feel so alive when you're in there.
Every single organ in your body gets a shock and gets into full working capacity. You know, the whole body just goes boom.
You feel like you're taking on the elements in there.
It would certainly wake you up in the morning.
Oh, it's a great social thing as well. Yeah, a real family spirit, yeah.
From dawn to dusk, you have people swimming here.
60 years I'm coming here to the 40 foot, and with Jez I never got tired of it.
I'm Paul Wright and welcome to the third programme in our 40 foot series. The series which investigates the rich social and historical lore surrounding the celebrated 40 foot bathing place situated in South County Dublin. Believe it or not, there's a special euphemistic language or phraseology used by those winter bathers who swim at the 40 foot. The ultimate aim of this language is to downplay the challenge of swimming in oftentimes frigid, cold and freezing sea waters. And with this in mind, I had the following question to pose all year round 40 foot swimmer Daniel McAvoy.
Daniel, also the way people describe the water in the 40 foot, you hear terms such as liberating, bracing. They're all very kind of soft, euphemistic language. Yes. Why is this now? I mean, do you ever hear like hardcore words like freezing or cold?
No, they don't tell you. The only thing that they won't tell you how is the water. But is one thing which always amuse me when you know you're going to jump into freezing water, people say, enjoy it. And I think it's the last expression I will think of. But anyway, when you come out, you do enjoy it and you feel well. That's a great recommendation I make about swimming in a cold day, on a cold day.
To describe the sea waters.
There are certain words you can use and you can't use down here. Cold cannot be used. Cold is the original four-letter word down here. What you would have to say now on a morning when people are collapsing with the cold and turning blue and stuff like that is you come out and you rub your hands and you say something like grand and fresh this morning. and the other one is when the sea is very rough and there's an east wind and people are being bashed to pieces off the rocks. Those who do get out are expected to say something like a grand bit of movement in it this morning.
And here's a few more 40 footers to share their views.
There's loads of euphemisms for freezing, but we never use them. There's a bit of a bite, that kind of thing. Or come on, ladies, what's some of the other terms that we use for when we don't say the C word, but we use other words.
What other words would be used?
Yes, you just told us that it was a family program, so we won't tell you what the other.
Well, I mean, we're family program, but we're mature adults also.
Yes, the water's lovely. Just freeze the balls off you.
Okay, well that'll have to be censored someday.
On the ocean blue and the tidal swell, each special day is cast forever in remembrance, where magic memories last. The 40 foot is a place of charm when the tide is still and high. May we linger here and swim a while as the lovely seagulls fly.
Given its rich history, the 40 foot has, over the centuries, witnessed its fair share of colourful episodes. in particular one 1906 episode concerning a certain 40-foot bather named Carson. To explain further, here's historian Peter Pearson, who co-wrote a definitive book on the 40-foot entitled The 40-Foot, a Monument to Seabathing.
Carson was one of these guys that always bathed, no togs on, and he did his exercises. Now, I think they eventually brought in a rule that you had to wear swimming attire after a certain time in the morning, after 8:30 or 9 or whatever. But I think the idea was he was seen to, people thought that he was flouting the general code of decency, let's say.
Carson would be seen picking his way to the water's edge, his entire body open to the elements with not a toss on him, and from head to foot his skin the colour of mahogany from constant exposure to wave and wind. After his swim, he'd leave the water and engage in calisthenic exercises for a full quarter of an hour. Totally nude, with not a thought as to what a passing lady might think. Indeed, Carson was warned on several occasions to desist, but quite literally stood his ground in full birthday clothes regalia and continued with his daily calisthenic exercises, come rain, hail or shine.
So a case was brought against him, and he lost the case, and I think he was fined 2 and 6, which would be like 20 cents or something today. But it was a token thing,
Eventually, he reluctantly had to face his day in court, at the behest of the council. The outcome, he was fined 2 shillings and 6 pence, a paltry sum in comparison to the usual prescribed fine of 40 shillings.
And it's also worth pointing out that the Carson case became such a cause célèbre for its time, with many 40-foot bathers deeply incensed over what they deemed unjust treatment of Mr. Carson by the authorities, that one man whose father swam at the 40-foot in 1906 later confided the following to a 40-foot folklorist.
My poor father, God rest him, always maintained that bathing costumes were unhealthy, and he defied the British Emperor to get into one.
Then a man named Carson dived in nude, but the police arrested him. Hauled down to Dunleary Court, fined 2 shillings for his swim. I was only larking, and so his story spread. He swam each day and others too, naked, pink and red. And so each summer evening, within the pleasant air, it's a peaceful spot to meditate, so free from toil and care. With Dublin Bay a matchless sight as the ocean gleams below. When summer comes, all make their way, forgetting worry and woe.
Indeed, the matter of the successful pursuit and prosecution of Mr. Carson should not be viewed out of place in the Ireland of its era. Believe it or not, in the following year, 1907, a reference in John Millington Synge's play The Playboy of the Western World to the word shift actually resulted in a riot by the audience. Oh my God, how Ireland has changed. And the issue of nude bathing at the 40-foot continued as a long-established tradition right up to the last decades of the 20th century. 40-foot folklore even relates the following.
There's a story told about a 40-foot member who once confessed to his wife that he bathed nude, and this was done with great discretion. She felt she did not like the idea of him bathing nude, with or without discretion, and considered it prudent to purchase a bathing costume for him with instructions to wear it. he continued to bathe as before, with either impunity or discretion. But on his way home, always dipped his bathing togs in the sea. His immediate circle of bathing friends were honour bound to make sure he always left for home with wet togs. The charade became so self-perpetuating that even on the occasional day when the angry sea made bathing impossible, the single triumph of the day was to wet your man's togs. The final indignity of the saga was when his chums made a collection and presented him with new bathing togs, leaving him with 2 pairs of togs that were never worn.
And no series on the 40 foot would be complete without investigating the old 40 foot world order of gentlemen only, women not allowed. For until the last few decades of the 20th century, believe it or not, women were for the most part excluded from using the 40 foot bathing facilities. 40 foot bather Michael Johnson.
It was for years a very sort of all-male institution here now, and in the early times that we were coming down here, my wife Pat swims me too. It had become an issue, if you remember, and people like Nell McCafferty came down with great big gangs of people and sat on the rocks but never swam, you see. So I felt that wasn't really the way to deal with it. So Pat and myself, we came down and we had 2 friends, Pat O'Kelly, another female Pat, and her husband Dave, and we had a system whereby when one of us was ready to go down, we'd ring the other one up, and we'd just do 2 rings on the phone, and if they were ready to come to, they would give us 2 rings back. We never answered the phone in either case, and then we'd come down here, and the 2 Pats, I think, were really the ones who broke the problem, you know.
So in other words, your wife, who was called Pat, and another woman who was called Pat as well, your friend's wife, Pat O'Kelly, these would have been the people that kind of broke the mold, so to speak.
They did it just by coming and swimming and leaving. We all came down together. Pat had previously swum around at the harbour there, and all of us together, the 4 of us, if you like, would just decide to come down. There was a little bit of, you know, not very serious aggro. And some of the people who are still swimming here now might have even been part of that aggro for a while. But I think we brought them all round, and it's a much nicer place now.
And at this juncture in proceedings, I talked with Michael's wife, Pat Johnson.
My husband swam, Mike swam at the harbour with me until there was no water at the harbour very early in the morning, and then he swam at the 40 foot. And finally, one of his fellow swimmers at the 40 foot, an elderly man, said, "Listen, is that your wife? Why doesn't she come in here and swim at 7 o'clock?" So I said, well, sure, I'd love to swim, and I don't care whether anyone wears togs or not. At that hour of the day, it was 7:15, it didn't matter. 2 hoots in hell. So I never went and swam at the harbour again unless it was the 40 foot was unswimmable, in which case we swam in the harbour.
Wow, and that would have been back in 40 years ago, and back in the 60s or thereabouts. Wow, so this was well before the days of the burning brass, so to speak, that hit the 40 foot and all that.
Yes.
It would be true to say that up till sort of the late 1960s, it was gentlemen only, in a very strict sense of the word.
40 foot historian and folklorist Peter Pearson.
And there was always somebody at the desk. There was a little table and somebody be sitting there to take donations. But they were also there to keep out possible troublemakers, you know, or riffraff, and maybe even women, you know. And not that women ever tried to get in before, but I think at that time then, you know, the first of the ladies began to make a stand and arrived in and caused consternation, of course, among the particularly the older gent
It was 1968 and the lone lady came, saw and conquered. It was a Sunday in June and she entered without any display of truculence, disrobed to display a bathing costume already in place, traversed the concrete platform and entered the sea. This in the presence of about 50 male bathers, and despite protests from the president of the association, who was on hand. It was an incident without precedent, and represented the first crack in the old world order of the 40 Foot as a male-only bathing place. It's worth noting that brave lone female protester in 1968 did not give her name, but was only making a point. The photograph, which subsequently appeared in the newspapers, was taken by an amateur photographer who was on the spot. In no sense could it be said that the woman was seeking publicity, at least not for herself. But it hardly escaped her notice, as it seems everyone else's, that the day she selected to make her point was the 64th anniversary of Bloomsday. A coincidence, maybe? Or was it Joyce looking down on the place with an unfinished script in his hand? All right, sisters?
It was quite entertaining, the whole thing. I was there a few times and I saw the antics, you know. The old fellas would be there parading around naked and the women would just carry on, ignore them. They'd put on bathing suits and get into the sea. And, you know, that's the way it was. And eventually, I suppose you could say the women wore them down. And or else maybe the men just got used to them. Or maybe they liked the idea in the end. And I mean, everybody's... It's taken as normal now, of course, but it did take, I suppose, some years to make that change.
But there was a festive time some years way back when that special place and a rocky face held only hardy men. And lovely ladies weren't allowed to show their faces there, to join and swim among the men who dived without a care. Then women's lib got its day and the ladies jumped in too. Men-only signs disappeared as they dived into the blue.
As was briefly mentioned by Michael Johnson earlier, one of the most outspoken women to lead the attack against the old order was celebrated feminist Nell McCafferty. 40 Foot folklorist Martin Miller.
Nell was a very, very funny woman. I have to say, I have a great admiration for Nell McCafferty. She was witty, she was never vulgar, and at least never with us anyway down here. And as I told you before, like when she marched in and all the girls had all placards and all the rest of it, and then they went around the back and a lot of the old men were there at the time and they took off their bras and sat down.
That was good.
Somebody once asked me I think it was Jerry Ryan actually, he got a team down here when he had, and I said didn't do any harm until the few old bones down here creaked that hadn't creaked for years.
Say it's easy to say in hindsight, oh, you know, the men were chauvinistic and they wouldn't let anyone in. But where they were coming from is that old Victorian idea of segregated bathing and what they thought was proper, and they wanted their right to bathe naked and change without having to cover themselves up and all the rest.
And a colourful historical example of what these Victorian norms, just mentioned by historian Peter Pearson, considered proper, is clearly illustrated in the events which occurred on the beaches of the seaside town of Kilkee, County Clare, in 1833. In that year, 1833, the fair ladies visiting Kilkee on their holidays made an official protest to local authorities about the disgusting and disgraceful conduct of nude bathers all along Kilkee's beach. Indeed, one young woman holidaying in Kilkee that eventful year was even moved to write the following in a letter to a lady friend in Limerick.
time here in Kilkee has been disturbing, to say the least. The ladies stood together to protest the bold attitude of the men who have been bathing naked on the strand for too long and involving too many of our menfolk, including George. We would usually take the sun as soon as possible, in the morning, in the view of the warmth of the weather and the refreshment of the Atlantic breezes. Oh, this can be so enjoyable in the peace of Kilkee. That is when one is allowed the full enjoyment of that peace. As you know only too well by now, the men have become bolder and bolder. They dash along the strand in a foolhardy manner, absolutely naked, before they enter the water. Oh, it can be looked upon as disgusting and disgraceful conduct, but I'm afraid to say we have found there are some who refer to themselves as ladies who seem to find a strange fascination, if not enjoyment, in the savage antics of these men. I have seen some of the ladies stay as long as they consider decent, while some of the menfolk actually strutted out of the strand, not showing the slightest bit of modesty. Personally, I'm not that all unduly disturbed by the sight of a man's naked body. To be truthful, I can find enjoyment in it, and especially when I see George, who can be such a devil, as you know. Still, it does present a sight that is completely out of place with the whole surroundings, and must be looked upon as most upsetting to the majority of the ladies, who are becoming more and more enraged.
Indeed, Kilkee records show that those enraged women made a strong case and eventually won the sympathies of the local authorities. In the end, it was decided that the beach at Kilkee would be divided into 3 parts. The 2 sides to be reserved for the ladies and the centre of the beach to be reserved for the men, who could bathe in the nude up to 10 a.m. in the morning. And so the fair ladies of Kilkee claimed their victory, and our young letter writer was afterwards triumphantly able to write to her Limerick correspondent.
Thankfully, at last, naked bathing has been confined by order of the authorities. While it is now perfectly true to say that the ladies can enjoy their days without the danger of that upsetting spectacle, nevertheless, it is also true to say that the excitement that was in it has vanished. Quite honestly, I miss it, and I feel I can write for many more of the younger generation when I say that Kilkee is not the same anymore.
And to discover more about the social and historical lore surrounding Dublin's famed 40 Foot, then make sure to catch our next number 4 programme in this larger 6-part 40 Foot series. This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, songs by Cliff Wedgbury. Until our next programme, I'm going to leave you with 40 Foot enthusiast Danielle McAvoy, speaking about the proportion of women who now swim at the 40 Foot. Danielle's comments are followed by those of Maureen McQuaid, Jim Tormey, and then various other 40-footers.
I think it's half-half at least, if not more women than men. Definitely. And I have arrived in Ireland when it was out of the question to put for a woman to put a foot in the 40 foot, never mind swimming there. But you don't even think now that it was a time when women were not allowed. It's, we are been eventually well accepted here.
Yeah, when we started about 15 or 16 years ago, my friend and I just arrived into the 40 foot. We didn't realise there was any. We thought that was all gone, but the men were very nice to us. But we didn't, because we came very early in the morning, about 8 o'clock, and we didn't realise there weren't very many women swimming at that stage. And it was only a few years later we found out that when we were chatting to them that they were sort of surprised to see us arriving in so casually.
Racism and ageism and sexism, that all that is gradually being eliminated from our lives, and that's expressed very well in the 40 foot, and people come down here to chat, to get to know each other, to swim, especially to swim, and it's a much better place. Like, it's enhanced hugely by the elimination of sexism here.
The hardest core 40-foot swimmers are the women, the middle-aged women.
The access to swimming is definitely participated in by both sexes equally, and in fact you'd probably find even more women swimming here during the winter.
We women can have access to the 40 foot as well as the men.
On the ocean blue and the tidal swell, each special day is cast forever in remembrance, where magic memories last. The 40 foot is a place of charm when the tide is still and high. May we linger here and swim a while as the lovely seagulls fly. Come all you Bowland lovers and listen to my song. It's only 13 verses, so it won't detain you long. It's all about the 40 foot, a bathing spot sublime, where many a brave sea bather likes to pass the time. I hereby sing of the 40 foot, a bathing spot renowned, situate in Sandy Cove, just south of Dublin town. If you descend her rocky steps alongside Dublin Bay, it's swimmers galore you'll find there every hour of each fine day. In bathing togs all sizes and many colours too, if it's thrills and spills you're after, this is the place for you, where people from all walks of life assemble, I declare, to swim the chilly Irish Sea while others stand and stare. Swimming in the icy brine each waking winter hour, those 40 footers love their time in the cold seas.